You see this quote? Does it mean anything to you? Yeah, it sounds kind of inspiring, but who's this Tim guy? Why is his quote so important that it's used to begin a feature-length video? Well, here's why I put that as the introduction. Because BioShock Infinite does the exact same thing. This is the most pretentious, self-indulgent piece of trash I've ever seen. It uses its own quote from a character we've never even heard of yet to attempt a dramatic, meaningful opening. Gosh, why can't you be more like Infamous, one of the best games of the 7th gen? Look, it quotes Abraham Lincoln, one of America's most famous and most popular presidents. It doesn't quote itself. Guys, I'm gonna be blunt. I have never played any game worse than BioShock Infinite. It's a horrible, downright awful game that takes a steaming dump on all logic and reason. It came out when I was only in middle school, and I still can't believe how bad it is and how badly I was lied to by gaming media. 9.5 on IGN, 94% on Metacritic, 9 on GameSpot. Scores like that better describe how painful the experience was. I've never seen anything so bad be so overrated. Heck, even Frozen was more deserving of its hype than this, and that was for 6-year-old girls. Thankfully, in the following years, more and more gamers began to come out and condemn this nightmare, pointing out how awful it truly is. But this game has so many layers of terrible, far more layers than Shrek and his onions can ever dream of, that I really have to dig into this mess just to see what went wrong here. You can think of it as either a rant, video essay, analysis, or straight up autopsy. Yeah, let's go with that last one. So, what made BioShock Infinite the very worst game I've ever played? Let's dig this up. Instead of asking what went wrong, the real question is, where does one even begin to tackle this monster? I figure the easiest place to start is the setting. BioShock Infinite takes place during the year 1912 in Columbia, a floating city above the US that worships the Founding Fathers, white supremacy, and the Confederacy. So the game is pretty much just Elizabeth, the SJW, telling Comstock to check his white male privilege.
You're a white male! So? You're a white man!
I kid. Columbia and Infinite setting in general is one of the things that was so praised about this game, but is also one of the worst parts, if you can even point out worst parts in this nightmare. Nothing at all about Columbia makes any resemblance of sense, and that's for a few reasons. The first is the backstory. The city's backstory was so lazily slapped together to the point where there are several logical gaps, no, logical trenches that an elementary schooler would have avoided. So, Columbia was completed in the year 1893 with the technological advancements made by Rosalind Lutece, with her discoveries in quantum physics and levitation allowing it to fly. And so it did, traveling to distant shores to show off American exceptionalism. That was until the leader, Father Comstock, decided to, blow up China. Columbia reacted to the Boxer Rebellion by blowing up Beijing. Huh, but if you think that's rough, wait until you see what Japan does. Anyways, this obviously led to disagreements with the US federal government, so Columbia seceded from the double Shrekking Union. Okay, so ignoring the obvious question of how a small floating city was able to effectively wipe out China's capital with 1901 technology, how on earth did it just secede from the United States? That is just, so nonsensical. There is no way in dung that the US would sit on its butt and just allow a small city to declare independence. Not even half a century has passed since the Civil War, when Lincoln slam dunked on the Confederacy and settled the secession question for good. Heck, even President Andrew Jackson threatened war against anyone who tried to leave the Union way back in 1833, when South Carolina first threatened secession over the feds increasing tariffs. Okay, South Carolina, as long as you don't try it again, right? And even worse, Colombia seceded in 1902, with Teddy Roosevelt as president. Of all the presidents you did not want to mess with, it was the great Teddy Roosevelt. If it was some windbag like Jimmy Carter, then sure, I'd believe it. But the bull moose who took a bullet mid-speech and kept going? Huh. So again, the point of this mini history lesson is that Colombia just left the US like nothing. There's no mentioned reaction from the growing world power, no war, no debates, nothing. Such an obvious hurdle was blatantly ignored. Well, wait, Colombia disappears into the clouds as I understand it, but Booker finds it sitting there right above Maine. If Comstock is trying to hide, he sucks. No matter the location, it would be so easy to spot any city floating in midair for dozens of miles. And as far as we know, there's no cloaking mechanism. Also, there's this prophecy that Colombia will come back to bring judgment on the entire world under the control of Elizabeth, aka the seed of the prophet or the lamb, whatever you call her. We see this come to fruition when Booker fails to save her. And this isn't the 1902 or 1912 world, nah, this is decades into the future, certainly past the Great Depression and World War II, as we can tell from the buildings in New York and Elizabeth's age. So how does Colombia plan to attack all of humanity with cannon fire when they have nuclear weapons? One hydrogen bomb later and Colombia is dust. Okay, I know I've already gone over time for a part of a single piece of one of Infinite's problems, but I have to keep going. Why is racism so prominent in Colombia? Now, that sounds like an obvious one because it's a city from 19th century America, but that doesn't explain the origins of the prejudice. So, the US commissioned the creation of the model American city to brag to the world, and if for some reason decided to put horrifically racist Southerners who hate Lincoln and praise John Wilkes Booth in charge of said model city in 1893, long after the end of slavery in the US and the entire Western world. Obviously, that would hurt the effort, wouldn't you think? Like, seriously, how were the British and French empires supposed to react to this? Okay, one more thing and then I'll move on. Lincoln is hated for emancipating slaves while the founding fathers are worshipped as gods, but the very founders they worship were profoundly anti-slavery. George Washington freed his slaves when he died. Thomas Jefferson, although he didn't free his slaves, penned in his original draft of the Declaration of Independence an entire paragraph condemning slavery. And the only reason it didn't make the final cut was because Franklin knew they needed the loyalty of the southern states to win the war. Yes, these were complicated men with their upsides and downsides and contradictions, but none of this is ever brought up or even considered. Okay, why am I going over the backstory and digging into history? Well, because in the original BioShock, its setting of Rapture was a direct response to the global events in the first half of the 20th century. Andrew Ryan founded the city to escape the so-called parasites, moochers who feed off an individual's work. This could take the form of a citizen on welfare, a government that nationalizes private property, taxation, or a religious group dictating what's moral and immoral. During the Great Depression with FDR's New Deal policies, the role of the federal government grew tremendously to relieve the economic turmoil. World War II caused even more problems for Ryan as the US became a superpower. With the nation that once celebrated liberty and laissez-faire economics gone, Europe in ruins, and the threat of nuclear holocaust, he saw nowhere else to turn besides building a new society according to his objectivist ideals with unhindered scientific progress, a culture that indulged itself in worldly pleasures, and a worship of humanity and human nature. Rapture was a well-crafted, intelligently designed setting that benefited from the creators opening a history book. Remember to take notes because I'll be coming back to the real BioShock many times later. But just to be clear, I don't dislike Infinite for not being like the first two games. Nah, change is perfectly fine so long as it's beneficial. I love the idea of introducing a new setting because even by the second game, Rapture felt tired. So when I bring up the originals, it's simply to show how they got something so right to better understand why Infinite failed. So we'll see why trying to be more like the originals actually devastates this installment later on. Anyways, the backstory and events surrounding Columbia are just too unbelievable and leave too many important questions unanswered. The other place where BioShock Infinite fails here is in fleshing out its setting in general. Nothing about Columbia feels real, as if the city doesn't function or even exist outside of the surface level stuff we are shown and or told. It's like being on an amusement park ride as the game holds your hand and takes you step by step to the highlights it wants to show you. But think about anything too hard or look too closely and the illusion falls apart. Off the bat, Irrational Games shot themselves in the foot by advertising Columbia as a living, breathing, functioning city as opposed to Rapture, which had just collapsed into total chaos when we first saw it. Sadly, this vibrant world to run around is far from what we actually got in 2013. Yes, Columbia is populated by sane humans like any normal city, well, besides LA, but again, all we get from the city's inhabitants is bland, with almost zero interaction. The player will walk past a group of people, listen as they give a line of basic dialogue. After the soundbite is triggered, the people just stand there staring at each other. Admittedly, this is only a minor nitpick. The real problems occur when the player actually tries to interact with people. Towards the beginning of the story, you get to enter running shops along the city streets, but you can't buy anything, even if they have something you want on display. Really, the only item you can actually purchase is a hot dog from a vendor, which gives you minimal health, which you probably won't even need at the time because nobody sells hot dogs in the middle of a combat situation. As opposed to buying things from, people like any normal community would, it's just like the original games, purchasing items from vending machines voiced by Ken Levine, except this time without all the catchy jingles. Even after all the trash Infinite tosses your way, probably the worst part of the game, period, is in the shantytown. After a brief walk from the entrance, the player will see a small shop set up with homeless societal rejects lined up. Among the food they're distributing is an infusion. Now, these infusions are important and rare collectibles as they can increase your max health, max salts which power vigors, or shield which allows you to take hits without losing health. So, of course, these are very valuable. Obviously, the player's gonna want it. But there's just one problem. Even though Booker is a normal person, and the vendors are normal people too, there's still zero interaction. You can't perform a very simple monetary transaction to acquire it. Nah, if you want the infusion, you've got two options. You can either A, steal it, and then kill the vendors when they inevitably attack you, or you can B, kill them first and then take it. It's basically a Black Friday at Walmart. So, although Columbia looks like a living city on the surface, dig a little deeper and you'll realize that it's just as desolate as Rapture. So, remember just a few minutes ago when I said that attempting to be like 1 and 2 actually hurts Infinite? Well, we've arrived, although this trend certainly continues into the gameplay and other elements as well. An easy example of carried over elements that make no sense would be the scrounging. Booker DeWitt is a private investigator from progressive era New York who acts all tough and assertive. So why does he eat from the garbage? No, seriously, he goes from trash can to trash can, eating whatever food he can find. In the first two games, Rapture was in total ruin, so the player had to rummage through cabinets and trash bins to find supplies. But Columbia is still a functioning city. There are shops and vendors all over the place, yet Booker still eats from the trash like Subject Delta. Now, I know this is more of a gameplay problem, but this just shows you the lack of thought put into the game and its setting. Next up are the Vigors, but first, let's talk more about Rapture. A staple of Rapture was genetic manipulation. With the discovery of this genetic material atom from sea slugs, the inhabitants of Ryan's vision spliced their genes for different attributes. The average person can basically change anything about themselves.
And Ryan frees us from the phony ethics that held us back. Change your look, change your sex, change your race. It's yours to change. Nobody else's.
Splicing could also make the user faster, stronger, smarter, etc., etc. Then plasmids came, which essentially gave the user superpowers like hurling lightning, spitting fireballs, summoning bees, telekinesis, etc., etc., etc. Everyone was doing it to the point when they all spliced themselves silly. Naturally, since everyone was shooting up, you see advertisements everywhere for tonics and plasmids. Plasmid ads in Rapture were as common as TikTok ads on YouTube. And because of their abundance, the player was able to wield them to their advantage in order to survive the dangerous halls of the city. BioShock Infinite brought plasmids back, but into a totally different context. Now called Vigors, Booker finds them and plenty of their advertisements scattered around Columbia, like Jack and Delta did in Rapture. They're present in Columbia, just like in Rapture, but they make no resemblance of sense in the new setting. First off, we never see anyone actually using them. Why would they be so heavily promoted and scattered around if no common folk are buying them? It makes no sense. The only ones we see with Vigors are two specific, rare enemy types. Heck, no one even mentions them. Nobody seems to care that average citizens can now equip superpowers. In BioShock, every other audio diary you found mentioned or referenced the existence of these abilities and their mark on society. It was part of everyday life in Rapture. And isn't Columbia supposed to be a hyper-religious, fundamentalist society? Does this not contradict their beliefs or raise concern at least a little bit? Going back to Rapture though, splicing made sense because that society was all about throwing away traditional morality and allowing men to be free from restriction. This hands-off approach, along with the gathering of some of the world's greatest scientific minds, allowed for unprecedented scientific development. Columbia is a new setting with new beliefs that may be at odds with the presence of Vigors, yet no one seems to care. Not only does no one utilize or care about Vigors, but they have no practical use in Columbia. Take Incinerate for example. It was just pyrokinesis. Average people used it to light cigarettes and fireplaces. The Vigor substitute is Devil's Kiss, which is a straight up firebomb. Now, why would a normal dude need to blow people up? Wait, actually don't answer that. Electrobolt was used by engineers to jumpstart generators and fix short-circuited doors. This is a funny one. The Vigor substitute here is Shock Jockey, which has the slogan, "Who needs the power company?" This Vigor only works on one specific, massive machine that only works half the darn time. So the alternative to a power company isn't just zapping your house, but installing this giant, expensive-looking hunk of junk and constantly recharging it with Vigors that require a constant salt intake. Gosh, it's so impractical that I'm expecting Sal to make a cameo.
I will never forgive you!
Okay, enough about the Vigors. Let's open this up and talk about the technology in general. Like everything else about Infinite, this too makes no sense. Columbia brings in a lot of familiar faces from Rapture like handymen, who serve as the replacement for Big Daddies, mosquitoes that replace Rapture's security bots, remodeled turrets, and of course, Vigors. Like I mentioned before, Rapture was able to create all of these things due to their ideology and unification of the world's brightest minds. Oh, and slugs, don't forget the slugs. The story and themes fed directly into the gameplay and its mechanics. Everything is there for a specific reason, and we're given believable sci-fi explanations for their creation. Columbia, once again, just tries to copy and paste what worked in Rapture, but these things don't work in the new setting. Not only does Infinite take place 50 years before the original, but also doesn't hold the same values, so it makes no sense that all these things that were already questionable for 1960 are present 50 years earlier. Booker even uses Cold War era machine guns, grenade launchers, and RPGs in 1912. still 2 years before even the First World War. It's insane, yet no reasoning for all these groundbreaking achievements is ever given. Well, Burial at Sea digs into it, but trust me, you're better off not knowing the explanation given. Look, if you need an overpriced DLC to explain core elements of your game, that should be a giant red flag that something is wrong. Gosh, that was long. I'm sorry, it's not my fault Irrational Games forgot how to create an engaging setting. Don't worry, subsequent segments I'll try to make a bit shorter. Now for the story, probably its biggest problem is how scarily similar it is to that of BioShock 2, which came only 3 years before. Let's play a quick game. Guess which game I'm describing. So, a rugged veteran with a symbol on his hand that marks him as evil, who's seen a lot of combat, has to traverse a hidden city in order to find a 17-year-old girl whose name begins with EL. But it's no walk in the park. This girl is the daughter of the city's leader. The leader has some insane religious beliefs that revolve around their heir as a messiah-like figure who will bring salvation to the city and the entire world as a whole, wiping out the old world systems and establishing a heaven on earth. Because of her importance to the city's cult, she's been locked up her entire life and kept away from the outside world. EL Girl is reluctant to follow in her parents' footsteps, so when the protagonist arrives to bust her out, they team up and use her overpoweredness in an effort to escape the city and save themselves. And of course, they're not going to let her go easy. The leader's not just going to let their child be kidnapped, so they send waves and waves of enemies to stop you. Oh, and also in some roundabout way, the protagonist is the girl's father. Sadly though, the veteran dad dies in the end. Okay, now time to guess which game, Infinite or BioShock 2? Exactly, you can't. They have the exact same story. It's almost disgraceful how much was lifted straight out of BioShock 2. What, was it too difficult to write a new story? Did Ken Levine just want a quick paycheck without putting in any effort? I really don't know. Irrational Games had 6 years from the release of the first game to work on Infinite. If no time was spent fleshing out the setting, writing a unique story, or creating good gameplay systems, don't worry, I'll get there soon, then what were they doing for all that time? To be honest, the story was one of 2's biggest weaknesses, not being nearly as strong or memorable as the first's. So, if you're going to copy a game's story, why this one? Alright, moving on from the clear copied and pasting, Infinite's plot is very sloppy too. BioShock 2's story dragged hard as Delta kept getting stalled doing the same thing for 80% of the game, searching for Eleanor. Here you find a girl towards the game's opening, but a solid 65% of Infinite is still doing the same thing while getting stalled, getting to the First Lady airship. After getting Elizabeth, that's their very first goal. At first, they're stalled by a malfunctioning rail that is apparently the only way to the blimp, so they have to detour to acquire Shock Jockey, which takes a crazy long time. After that's dealt with, and they finally get the ship, Elizabeth gets mad when she finds out you're bringing her to New York instead of Paris, although Booker's mentioned that he needs her to settle a debt in New York several times by now.
Where are you from, Mr. DeWitt?
New York.
What did you do there?
Business much like this. It's not really caters writing on a resume.
It was a fine thing you came along when you did.
How do you think I ended up here? I gambled, and now I owe money to men you don't want to be in debt to. I come here to pay it back. Me busting you out, what do you think that was? Charity?
Who sent you?
Somebody who was willing to take my marker in exchange for you.
So after all that, you're back to square one. Writing 101, if hours of your story don't further the plot in any significant way, then you need a revision. After getting knocked out, Booker wakes up to find the rebel group Vox Populi stealing the First Lady airship, making Booker go on a very long quest in Finkton and Shantytown as part of a deal to get it back. and once more hours and hours are spent on menial tasks, you get the ship back and head for New York. But after all that, Songbird destroys the First Lady anyways, leaving you back at square one again. Then a few more hours of boring shenanigans occurs until Infinite ends. Why? Just why? Like BioShock 2, but a lot more frustrating, most of the game consists of an overly dragged out second act with no progress being made for hours on end. It's terrible. The original was the only BioShock with a well-paced, balanced 3-act structure.
Pretty, isn't it? Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
The first 4 areas are Jack saving Atlas and his family. After the family dies, Jack journeys through 4 more areas to kill Ryan and avenge them. After Andrew Ryan gets golf clubbed, the entire thing was revealed to be just a scheme to get Jack to unwittingly assist mobster Frank Fontaine in controlling and escaping Rapture with its scientific treasures to sell on the surface. Then, the third act consists of 4 more areas and a boss battle to stop Fontaine from splicing the entire world and becoming the richest man alive doing so. There was never any plot regression, and for the one time Jack was stalled for the sole purpose of extending the game's runtime, it led to one of the most memorable levels in gaming, period.
That's better. Atlas Ryan. Atlas Ryan. Da 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 da. I'm what? You could get something decent on the radio. The artist has a duty to seduce the ear and delight the spirit. So say goodbye to those 2 blowhards, and hello to an evening with Sander Cohen.
The original was so good. Why does Infinite need to be so bad? The plot is just constant stalling and regression. Once all the back and forth nonsense finally stops, we finally get to the ending.
Oh my God!
BioShock Infinite's ending isn't just bad. No, it's a special kind of bad that only very few ever achieve in their lifetime. Or if you're Nick Cage, then pretty much all the time.
I never misspelled anything! Not once, not one time!
Sadly, there's so much suck bundled into the last half hour that I can't give one single reason for what the Shrek happened. I guess a decent place to start is on Comstock's flagship, The Hand of the Prophet. Now, I'm not gonna lie, endings have never been BioShock's strong suit. The original had a pretty good, okay finale with Fontaine, but I imagine it's no one's favorite part of that game, although the ending cutscene is very touching. BioShock 2 opted out of a finale and just chucked a bunch of enemies your way in the last few minutes. Infinite, however, has this incredibly stale horde mode, as waves of enemies come your way. Many found this to be a disappointing climax, myself included, because Songbird was built up to be this intimidating force to be reckoned with. There would be posters warning you about Songbird, kids even had their own nursery rhyme about how deadly this guy was. He occasionally appeared to scare Booker and Elizabeth, and halted their progress too. It became clear that escaping Columbia would mean killing the darn thing. It also doesn't help that his design is reminiscent of the Big Daddies from the first 2 games, something that the player routinely thought. But no, Infinite had a better idea. Instead of a dramatic battle between the captive and her guardian, who was also her only friend, it turns Songbird into an ally who you use to fight blimps as you take out the horde. Oh. It was such a waste of one of Infinite's few and far between good ideas.
I see you found our bestseller.
Another shortcoming of the ending is that simply, it's all smoke and mirrors. Instead of providing a satisfying conclusion to this dragged out story, Infinite chooses to distract the player so they forget about all the shortcomings, but all this does is lead to another dragged out scene and some extremely hammy dialogue.
What is that?
It's a key.
Where did it come from?
It's always been there. I just couldn't see it.
I just couldn't see it. He was a thief! A criminal!
A story about infinite realities isn't hard to explain. Into the Spider-Verse just recently came out and had no trouble with this, but this game takes you on a 15-minute journey as Elizabeth tries to explain this concept to Booker and, by extension, the player. She uses lighthouses to illustrate this concept, as each lighthouse represents a door to a different yet similar reality. But small winks and nods are apparently not enough for these writers. So she proceeds to take the player to Rapture, again for no reason besides smoke and mirrors. Please ignore all the obvious flaws. Here's Rapture. Look, it's the first level in BioShock. Love me, love me. I was speechless at that point. It's terrible enough that we just sat through the first bad BioShock game, but to bring the original down with you?
Unbelievable.
So all this time is spent by Elizabeth trying to wow the player and trick you into thinking that the game is deep and intelligent when she massively contradicts herself. We just established that there are millions upon millions of parallel universes. Infinite. But then, immediately after explaining this to Booker, Elizabeth begins a vengeful crusade against Comstock as she attempts to murder him in every timeline by drowning him at the baptism. This takes us back to that pivotal moment in Booker's life, but instead of getting dunked by a priest, all the variations of Elizabeth throughout the story drown him, ending every Booker before he starts the path to becoming Comstock. But of course that doesn't work, because there are infinite realities. She just told us this. Infinite means infinite. Just killing one Booker at the branching off point won't stop Comstock from ever existing because it's infinite. There are universes where Booker chose to not even show up, where he received the baptism but didn't lead a crazy cult, where he didn't take it and became Comstock anyways, where he got sick that day but got baptized another day. Infinite means infinite. The game tries to sound so smart when Elizabeth is sounding like an idiot, contradicting herself, so it doesn't work. And do I even need to bring up the grandfather paradox? If you go back in time to kill an ancestor, then you won't be bored and therefore can't kill them, causing you to be born. It's a paradox that Infinite foolishly stumbles into. This may come as a shock, but I don't hate the lead Booker DeWitt. But that's simply because there's not much to hate. He's your rugged, generic, grumpy old veteran who can handle himself in a fight. Booker's scarred by his dark past as a Pinkerton and slaughtering Indians at the Battle of Wounded Knee. He's given a pretty good performance by Troy Baker, but nothing memorable. My only real gripe with the lead is how stupid some of his decisions are. Like, seriously, Booker has no thought process. At the start of the game, Booker's delivered a note that specifically tells him not to pick number 77 at a raffle. Then, at the raffle, guess what number he picks? I'm kidding, it's a raffle. He doesn't know the number he's gonna get. But when he sees that he got ball number 77, Booker has no reaction at all. He doesn't try to choose again. He doesn't give the ball to someone else. Nothing. Then, shortly after, he walks past this sign. Clearly, whoever has the mark AD on their hand is not viewed kindly in this city. So, after noticing that he is literally the Antichrist to the citizens of Columbia because of the AD, he obviously chooses to cover it up with a rag or something, right? Right?
Not today!
No, of course not, because that would require an intelligent decision. Instead, he just walks along like nothing happened. Antichrist symbol out in the open for all to see. He blindly accepts his fate, ignoring the clear warning signs. But the real kicker is this bit right here.
Yes, we need to land below and fight our way up to him.
Or we can just fly this thing to Paris.
Just drop me off if you want to. This isn't your problem, Booker.
Or we can just fly this thing to Paris. Fly this thing to Paris. Fly this thing to Paris.
After hours upon hours of gameplay trying to get the one and only First Lady airship, after hopping into completely different realities, and after taking so many bullets to the face, this entire time they could have just taken one of the hundreds of small police ships out of the city. After all this time, it was that simple? What in the name of Shrek? Booker has to be the dumbest man alive. BioShock Infinite wants a player to sympathize with Booker, the poor guy who lost his daughter and drinks his problems away. But I don't sympathize with stupid people. If your own stupidity is the cause of your problems, if you could have avoided getting shot at by simply covering your hand or asking for a different ball, then I don't care that you're being shot at. The previous two games did a great job with getting us to care about our protagonist. Jack was a mind-controlled freak who was sold by his mother and whipped up in a lab. All his memories turned out to be fake, and he was a slave to the most dangerous man in Rapture. This was a guy you felt for. Subject Delta was just a deep sea diver when he stumbled upon Rapture, was kidnapped, and then imprisoned. Then the poor dude was shoved inside a diving suit and forced to live the rest of his life following a blood-sucking girl, and even just doing that got him killed. And when he's resurrected and has to find Eleanor, he's going insane while waves and waves of splicers are being thrown at him when he's just trying to save himself. Both were victims of evil men who were willing to do anything, screw over anyone to get ahead. Booker is just an idiot. It's hard to dislike Elizabeth. I mean, come on, she's a fun, upbeat, extroverted bookworm who's seeing the world for her first time. It's like Rapunzel meets Belle, an unstoppable wombo combo of two of Disney's best princesses. I really enjoy seeing her interactions with Booker, who is the polar opposite. They work off each other well and provide Infinite's best moments. Maybe the only touching scene in this entire game is when Booker plays the guitar for her and we hear Elizabeth sing.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by and by? Is a better home awaiting in the sky?
I'm not afraid to give credit where credit is due, but sadly, that's where the credit ends. Making Elizabeth upbeat was an easy way to get the audience to like her, but she's not realistic. She spent her entire life locked away in a tower. Her only friend was a robotic bird, for Pete's sake, yet she's an outgoing socialite? It doesn't add up. Any girl in those circumstances would be extremely socially awkward, skeptical of everything, and not understanding simple societal norms. Then, over time, maybe she develops and gets used to life on the outside. But nah, that would take too much effort. Peppy girl it is. Elizabeth, too, isn't free from her own dumb decisions. I already mentioned the whole ending contradiction, so another good example is in Finkton. At this point in the story, Booker and Elizabeth have to get weapons from gunsmith Chen Lin for Daisy Fitzroy, leader of the Vox. The problem is that Chen Lin is dead in their timeline, so they hop to another universe where Chen Lin is alive, but in there, he's been deprived of his tools. The two then hop into another universe, but then the Vox already have their weapons, are waging a full-scale war, and Booker was martyred. I'm bringing this up now because for the entire game, Elizabeth's been bringing in all kinds of items for Booker through tears. She summons things from other realities and brings them for the player to use throughout their journey. She does this for the whole game, yet for this one instance, she figures instead of just bringing in the weapon to a tear like any non-idiot would, to instead jump into the tears. Yeah, because obviously there won't be consequences for going into an alternate reality. You even hear the two questioning whether this is a good idea before doing so, but they're just like, screw it, why not? What could possibly go wrong? The main antagonist of Infinite is Zachary Hale Comstock, of course, as he's the city's fundamentalist dictator. And like Booker, but even more so, I don't dislike him simply because I don't care hard enough about him to hate him. Comstock just is. He's not interesting, he's not engaging, I'm not intimidated by him, he has no presence, he's just the kooky religious leader. Anybody who's read or watched Stephen King has already seen this guy 1,000 times over. Infinite tries a similar thing to Bioshock 2, no shock there, in that the leader is technically the puppeteer pulling all the strings, but the main threat we're concerned about is a much deadlier servant. In 2, it was the Big Sisters. Here, it's Songbird. They both failed at this for their own special reasons, so the result is that neither of the big bads or bigger bads make for memorable antagonists, leaving the narrative feeling empty with a void waiting to be filled by a big twist villain like Fontaine. What made that villain work over Comstock is that Fontaine was given a wide range of emotions that fleshed him out as an actual human being. We got to see more than just the villainous side. We saw him love, we saw him get angry, we saw his heart break.
I remember when me and a crowd put you in that sub. You were no more than 2. You were my ace in the hole. But you were also the closest thing I ever had to a son. And that's why this hurts. Betrayal, kid. Life ain't strictly business.
Andrew Ryan too had plenty of range, giving riveting speeches and softer moments of doubt, showing his inner struggles.
Could I have made mistakes? One does not build cities if one is guided by doubt. But can one govern in absolute certainty? I know that my beliefs have elevated me just as I know that the things I have rejected would have destroyed me. But the city, it's collapsing before my... Have I become so convinced by my own beliefs that I have stopped seeing the truth? Perhaps. But Atlas is out there, and he aims to destroy me and to destroy my city. To question is to surrender. I will not question.
Comstock, on the other hand, is just a one-note religious southerner. Now that we're out of Rapture, you can tell that Infinite is trying to fill the massive shoes left by the minor villains we found under the Atlantic. Dr. Steinman and Peach Wilkins were great, but let's be honest, Sander Cohen totally sold the show in Fort Frolic, in Bioshock's 7th area as Jack was on his way to Ryan. Cohen trapped Jack in his mall/personal art gallery, where he displayed plastered bodies as works of fine art. The Psycho forced Jack to collaborate on his masterpiece, and thus the creepiest yet most interesting level in the entire series began. Infinite tries to capture the magic of this level with more insane characters, Slate and Fink, but failed quite miserably. Again, with neither one having any sort of presence or remarkable character trait. Yeah, they're both strange and mildly off-putting, but we've seen that plenty of times before and in much higher dosages. Sander Cohen wasn't just wacky or exotic. He wasn't a good villain just because he made you fight waves of enemies like Slate, but because he had a unique personal relationship with Jack. Jack was the obedient servant who did what everybody told him to. Cohen was the down-on-his-luck artist who wanted someone who could appreciate his work and collab with. He was tired of his disciples abandoning him. Jack gave Cohen validation, and Cohen was the first person to truly appreciate Jack, if you'd exclude Tenenbaum giving you free stuff. Also, it didn't hurt that everywhere you looked, you were reminded that Cohen was running the show, with the plastered bodies posed all over and a spotlight constantly shining on you as you were basically his entertainment for the night. And finally, your collaboration ended with a subtle moral choice. Is he too insane to let live? Do you hold a grudge against him? Or will you leave him be with his art and go on with your deal? He didn't give you a gun and yell at you to kill him. Moving on, and I swear this will be the last piece of the character segment, The average enemies you fight throughout Columbia suck. They're just so boring, and I figure that's because of the new gameplay style. Instead of getting to know our adversaries, we just walk in and clear the room without hesitation. One of the best things about the originals, and especially the first game, was how much personality each enemy had. BioShock Splicers each had their own unique character traits. They would mumble to themselves as they wandered each area. They'd do things like pray to God for forgiveness, coach themselves on how to talk to girls, cry about wanting to be famous, stuff like that. And that's not to mention some of the many scripted moments like this. This made BioShock one of the very few games that bothered to humanize the many henchmen you fought. Infinite completely regresses the enemies back to the typical mindless pile of pixels you aim at and nothing more. They give the typical dialogue like, "Get him," or "There he is," but never anything more. We never learned anything about the many individuals we're blazing through, which is pretty messed up when considering that these aren't robots or aliens or mindless drug addicts, but many of them are typical police officers, just men and women in law enforcement. They probably have families, friends they care about, yet Booker has no problem cutting through them like butter. Well, Elizabeth does ask Booker about his tendency to kill, but that's more of a focus on Booker's killing and never the people he is killing. Isn't it weird? We're shown the humanity in violent drug addicts, but not normal cops? Okay, next part. BioShock Infinite keeps the contradictions going in the gameplay department. On one hand, it wants to be another BioShock game, so many things carry over, but on the other hand, it wants to be more of a mainstream, first-person shoot-'em-up like the contemporary CODs and Battlefields. Needless to say, this balancing act doesn't work, and many times the two are totally at odds with each other. For example, Infinite has a weapon upgrade system like the original two games. Before, weapon upgrades were given through rare and hidden vending machines that granted a single upgrade for no cost. The real trick was finding them all. Infinite takes a different approach. Instead, it turns these upgrades into a regular common vending machine that you pay buttloads of money for. But regardless, weapon upgrades don't work together with the new 2-weapon limit. Yeah, that's right, in this game you're only allowed 2 weapons at any given time, similar to Call of Duty and Uncharted. The result of these two gameplay elements being smushed together is that weapon upgrades become a gamble. You never know what 2 weapons you'll have in the next minute, or which guns will be around in the next area, so it's common to get stuck with weapons you haven't touched in terms of upgrades, making you a lot weaker. So you can't just focus on upgrading your favorite guns, but have to guess what'll be readily available. In every other game where weapon customization is an option, those guns are your babies. You pour out all of your heart and soul into making them the best guns around, but not here. In the first 2 games, you had all of your guns on you at all times, and they were the same ones from the start of the game. Every time you pulled out your shotgun, you knew it was the one you violently fought with as you got ambushed in Medical Pavilion. And every time you upgraded them, there was a new attachment to make them look cooler. They were personalized. You know, the whole, there are many like it, but this one is mine. There aren't even cool additions to the guns anymore. You just get another tick and an invisible stat boost. If things weren't bad enough in the first half of the game, it gets a whole lot worse as you go through the second tear to the Vox-controlled world. Suddenly, the quantity of available guns gets doubled as Vox versions of weapons become available. Now there are twice the amount of weapons to upgrade and half the chance of running into your favorite guns. All your upgrades are almost wiped clean because now you have an entirely different batch of guns to worry about. We see this COD BioShock dichotomy once again with the actual gunplay itself. You see, unlike the previous games, Infinite opts to be much more of a shoot 'em up. Basically, you walk into a new room or area, clean out the enemies, and then go to the next room with that on loop. This is what the 2-weapon system was made for, as opposed to the 2 previous iterations in the series where you wandered around a single large area and fought the creatures that roamed the halls. Infinite's system works for when it's trying to be like Uncharted or Call of Duty, but when it tries to be like BioShock, things go horribly wrong. Case in point, the Handymen. Again, they're the Big Daddy replacement. Before, Big Daddies were an optional fight. They didn't attack you so long as you left them and their little sister alone. This allowed the player to prepare for a fight by setting traps and thinking up a game plan. These were super tough enemies, so without any strategy, you'd get wrecked. That's what made them so much fun, the strategy, using every trick in your book to come out alive. Infinite carries them over, but without everything that made them work. Here they're just thrown at you to fight at random points in the story. There's none of that preparation, strategy, or the loving relationship that gave them so much personality. Just fight the big robot men again. But the fights don't work at all due to Infinite's COD-like gameplay mechanics. Carrying only 2 weapons at a time means that you can be stuck with guns that don't suit this particular fight, like the sniper rifle, shotgun, or pistol. There aren't multiple ammo types anymore for different strategies, keeping you from entering the fight with 0 ammo. And you can't carry first aid kits anymore, so every time you get hit, you have to run around like a headless chicken for your shield to regenerate. The once iconic battle devolves into running around chicken style. It just doesn't work. Like the Handymen, Big Daddies would kill you in only 2 or 3 hits, but because you were able to carry first aid kits, you could still stand your ground, stay in the fight, and not have to worry about finding more health after every blow. And you didn't have to worry about running out of ammo and needing to find new weapons, because not only did you have all of your weapons on you at all times, but each one had 3 unique ammo types. BioShock Infinite's gameplay is alright in the small fights, but when the game gets challenging, the gameplay mechanics start to break down. In the originals, it was fun in the small fights, but in the battles with Big Daddies and bosses, that's where the gameplay really shined, because all the different gameplay mechanics join together in unison in these desperate attempts to survive. The weapons worked with the plasmids, which worked with the environment. Meanwhile in Infinite, everything just breaks down. Oh yeah, and that reminds me, the environment. What made the original's gameplay so engaging was that every room was different. The layout, the setting, the circumstances were always shifting, which greatly impacted how you fought. Every room required a different strategy, as you had to take advantage of whatever the world gave you. Security cameras, turrets, pools of water, oil spills, oil drums, health stations, trap balls, splicers, and heck, even store windows affected the way you played, so you constantly had to think on your feet. Everything about Rapture was yours to manipulate, to get a leg up on your enemies. In Columbia, all of that is either removed or so minute that you wouldn't even know it's there. Like, you can still shock enemies in water, but you're floating in the sky. How much flooding do you expect, as compared to the ruins of a city under the ocean? The result is that every room feels the same. Run in, shoot the enemies, go to the next room. The fun wears off really quickly. A big question I had walking out of Infinite was, why? Why were all these game-breaking changes made? Why was Booker DeWitt so nerfed when contrasted with Jack and Delta? Was it purely a result of level design? Was it simply to appeal to a more mainstream audience? These were the thoughts that ran through my head until it hit me like a freight train. Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the key. Do you remember all the advertisements, all the trailers and articles leading up to the release? Do you remember how powerful and important they made her seem to the gameplay? She was able to do crazy things with telekinesis, summon storms, and flat out demolish waves of enemies. Elizabeth was supposed to be an all-powerful force of nature, but it was too much. Whether it was the technology, time constraints, or some other creative limitation, her abilities had to be toned way down. In the actual game, she can't do nearly as much as advertised, so how do they make her still appear to be useful? Simple. Handicap Booker.
Trust me.
God's sake.
It's for the best.
Eddie, please!
Almost done. Just one more.
Now, this may all sound like conspiracy, but think about it. What are the things that Jack and Delta could do that Booker can't? Well, they were able to carry multiple first aid kits and eve hypos, hold all their weapons at once, swap between 3 different ammo variants for each gun, hack turrets, security bots and locks. Oh, and telekinesis. Telekinesis is amazing. Now, think about what Elizabeth does in Infinite. She throws you medkits and salts, picks door locks and safes, summons guns, along with friendly turrets and mosquitoes, throws you ammo and gives you money. All of these things would be completely pointless if Booker was as useful as a 4-year-old. If Jack was in Infinite, all Elizabeth would be good for is bringing cash. And even if Irrational accomplished its goal to make her more useful, this still leaves the game a lot less fun than the previous iterations because there's so much less you can do. The originals were created with the mindset that if you wonder whether something is possible, it is. Heck, you can even create your own Molotovs by lighting bottles on fire. Infinite, on the other hand, just cuts entire elements out. Although I enjoyed it, some people weren't huge fans of the hacking minigame, but instead of making a better system like 2 did, Infinite chose to just cut it out entirely, reducing hacking down to a temporary hacking vigor. But this is way worse than before because you can't even hurt a hacked turret. The only time you can hurt one is if it's able to hurt you back, making the vigor nearly useless. Yup, game of the year, 10 out of 10. Escort missions are difficult to get right too, and are often the most frustrating part of the game. The original has one of these, with the little sister that's perfectly fine. 2 stumbled here because you had to do a constant horde mode that got old real fast. But again, instead of coming up with something even better for Elizabeth, she's just written out of the gameplay entirely besides tears. Even though she's supposed to be a huge religious figure of great importance, no enemy even acknowledges her existence. She's just a non-element who gives dialogue, not that different than Atlas. Yet this is supposed to be such an amazing character according to the reviews. Both previous games had research progression systems, but that all got scrapped here too. One last removal is the Vita Chamber. Now look, I'm not about to argue that I love the respawn systems from the previous games. Actually, that's the only real criticism I have with the original. But you can still turn this system off and go by a fair last save respawn. However, instead of working to make this system work or come up with something better, Infinite simply has Elizabeth revive you, costing you money, and simultaneously healing up your enemies. Now, this isn't a bad idea on its own. It actually sounds like a step in the right direction at first. But like many things about Infinite, it gets undercut by other gameplay elements that it doesn't mesh with. In the 3rd act, you have to take down a bullet sponge boss who continuously reanimates waves of enemies. Due to the COD-ness of Infinite, it's easy to run out of ammo for your weapons of choice, get overwhelmed by the hordes of soldiers, die, and keep losing money. Again, when you die, all your enemies get a health boost, even the bullet sponge ghost. Now maybe you can see the problem. This can lead to a cycle of death and despair if the player isn't careful. It's not an end of the world problem if you're really good at the game and can easily avoid death, but for anyone who's not a pro, this gets very frustrating. Oh, and I kind of lied before. You don't just have to fight the ghost of Lady Comstock. No, you have to fight her 3 times within half an hour. Yeah, the gameplay sucks. Another huge criticism I have against this one is the total lack of replayability. If you've played Infinite once, there's no reason to return unless you're a glutton for punishment or have to record footage for a rant video on YouTube. The thing is, there's nothing to replay Infinite for. One playthrough will give you the full experience because there's a blatant lack of unique ways to play the game. And also cause none of your moral choices affect the story or gameplay, but I'll get there soon enough. Yes, the player can upgrade different weapons and vigors or use new gears, but none of these changes effectively impact the playstyle. Really, most of the upgrades once again are invisible stat boosts that you don't really notice. And the gears, what, you automatically reload when jumping off a rail, increased clip capacity, chance of lighting up enemies through melee. Yeah, these are mildly helpful, but nothing major in the slightest. They're also minor and unnoticeable that each subsequent run-through will feel the same as the first. I've gone through this game 4, maybe 5 times now, and haven't felt any difference in a single one of these playthroughs. Now, let's contrast that to the previous 2, which are both infinitely replayable. See what I did there? Every single run-through felt unique because there was so much customization that fundamentally changed how you played. Gene tonics were total game changers. Like natural camouflage in the original allowed the player to turn invisible when standing still. This reworked tons of the gameplay into more of a stealth-based experience rather than a shooter. Drill Specialist in Bioshock 2 actually got rid of all your guns, allowing the player to only use the drill, hacking tool, and plasmids, but making them a lot stronger. These are just 2 of the many examples, but show how there were some total game changers that would completely alter the player's experience. Bioshock 2 also gave players the option for a 3rd weapon upgrade that totally changed its application, like turning the rivet gun into fiery death and drill as a bullet deflector. And that's not to mention how in both previous games you could have specialized in fire, ice, or electricity depending on your selection of tonics and plasmids. Infinite has none of this. It always feels the exact same. You can't come back to try a new playstyle because there are no new playstyles. After dragging myself through this mess, the theme of choice stood out to me the most. Choice is so prevalent throughout Infinite's story, as each choice we make opens up an entirely new world of possibilities. Booker DeWitt's most defining moment came at his baptism. Does he receive it or not? In the universe he does, he becomes Comstock and leads Columbia. Where he doesn't, he winds up a depressed drunk who sells his daughter to, well, Comstock. Also, if Booker fails to save Elizabeth, the world essentially ends. If he's successful, well, we don't see, but he gets his daughter back. Actually, it's the choices of the Lutesses that kickstart the events of the story, as they decided to help Booker get Anna back after Comstock tried to kill Rosalind in his reality. Then, Infinite provides the player several choices to make throughout the course of the story. At the raffle, do you chuck the baseball at the shamed interracial couple or think? What should Elizabeth wear? The bird symbolizing freedom and her potential future, or the cage that symbolizes captivity and her past? Should you point your gun at a suspicious worker on the phone? Will you give Slate a quick death, or leave him for Comstock's men? These are presented as important choices. Now, choice isn't new to the series, but there's a heavy emphasis on it here, as, again, one small choice can alter the course of history. The problem comes when you realize that your decisions are pointless and don't impact the story or gameplay in any meaningful way. Heck, even forgetting the big cinematic choices, you can run around and gun down random, innocent, unarmed civilians and get no response from Elizabeth and have no effect on the story or gameplay itself, completely contradicting the message Infinite is trying to provide. Either that, or the message is that we really don't have a choice, and we're all destined for a single painful outcome that's far beyond our control. Now, this is certainly hinted at, but this would be contradicted by all the backstory, most notably the baptism. Now, I've been super negative for the vast majority of this video, and rightfully so, but I do appreciate what the writers did with the Vox Populi and their leader, Daisy Fitzroy. At first, Elizabeth viewed them as noble heroes fighting for the common people and stopping oppression. The racial minorities look up to them as saviors. They all seem well and good, but naive little Elizabeth realizes over time that they're just as bad as Comstock and his men, calling for a white purging. Like all of us, Elizabeth starts off naive, not understanding the intricacies of the world in which she resides. It's an innate desire in all of us to root for the underdog, for the everyman rebels standing up to their elitist oppressors. However, life doesn't tend to work out this way. Usually rebel groups are just as, if not more extreme than their leaders. And even if movements begin for a worthy cause, they're all too often hijacked by extremists who are looking for any opening to spread their ideology. The Vox are a great fictional example of this. Yeah, that's right, I just gave a compliment. Congratulations, you actually did something right. Well, this gets ruined in Burial at Sea, like most of the lore, but whatever, it was good here. Here, I'll just go through a few more problems and complaints that either didn't fit into any of the previous categories, or that I couldn't figure out how to smoothly integrate in them. So, let's wrap this up and get into the last of the terribleness. First off, the horror. What happened to the horror? Now, BioShock was never an Amnesia or even a Dead Space, but each game had strong horror elements, putting plenty of effort into creeping out the player with strange imagery, unpredictable enemies, and many wild set pieces. Infinite completely forgets the horror roots of the series, leaving a gaping hole in the game's DNA. Well, there is that one area with the sirens, but it's short-lived, self-contained, unfitting, and not nearly as creepy as Medical Pavilion, Fort Frolic, or Persephone. From some of the promotional material, it seemed like they were slathering on some horror elements, but these ideas ultimately got dumped, which really sucks. BioShock has always been an M-rated series, but Infinite's violence is so over the top for no reason. Just look at the first encounter. It's just another example of how Infinite thinks it's so mature and so amazing when really it's trying so hard that you can see how immature it really is. It's the middle schooler of the series. I know I kind of already mentioned all the pretentiousness in the intro, but match that with some bad writing and you get some really bad, cheesy dialogue that doesn't sound like actual people talking, but people reciting a play written by middle schoolers who are trying to sound all edgy and poetic. Here are some clear examples.
Are you real?
Real enough. Smother him in the crevice.
Smother, 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 smother.
I will stop him.
No. That is an oath you cannot keep. But promise me that if it comes to it, you will not let him take me back.
It won't come to that.
Booker, are you afraid of God?
No. But I'm afraid of you.
The music is boring. Yeah, I know this is 1912 and there aren't many options for good songs, but even the original score pales in comparison to the others. And finally, I've always hated the Lutesses, not only because of their super posh, smug, and annoying personalities, followed by accordion music, but their only role in the game is to serve as an exposition dump. Whenever the main characters get stuck or have completed their goals, the Lutesses come to explain where to go next and to give hefty exposition. Irrational Games' 2013 release, BioShock Infinite, is a giant, tangled up mess. 99% of its overly long and dragged out runtime does not work in the slightest. There are so many terrible things in Infinite that would easily be the worst part in any other game. It's super pretentious, screaming a sense of self-importance. Columbia's backstory leaves way too many massive questions open for us to buy that this place actually exists the way it does. Elements from previous games are carried over, even if they have zero place in Columbia. The setting in general is underdeveloped. The story is lifted straight out of its already less than stellar predecessor. The plot is super repetitive and involves tons of backtracking. Characters constantly make stupid decisions. Characterization is baffling. The gameplay is a bloody civil war between BioShock and more mainstream shoot-'em-ups. The player gets super handicapped just to make Elizabeth look more useful than she really is. The antagonists are uninteresting. The themes fall flat. And to simply put it, this game isn't fun. And that's me attempting to be impartial, judging it by its own merits, as its own game. But as an entry into the BioShock series, it's even more horrible. The unsettling and disturbing horror elements that define the others are nowhere to be found, with the exception of one mildly weird scene. Nearly all the gameplay mechanics that made the others so unique are also mysteriously absent or mutilated to the point of losing recognition. And going for a more generic gameplay style caused Infinite to lose everything that was so memorable about the series. Yes, there are a few bright spots in this cumulonimbus of a game, but they are very few and far between. There's some good voice acting, a single touching moment, a well-handled look at the true nature of rebellions as opposed to our romanticized view of them. The Skyhooks were fun when they were around, and the graphics and sound design are really good for 2013 standards. Sadly, these small glimmers of light fail to save this colossal disaster that single-handedly sank one of my favorite series, which included my all-time favorite game and favorite DLC. And all that is why BioShock Infinite is the worst game I have ever played. And remember, if you enjoyed this tremendously long video, to please leave a like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Happy New Year's!